All right, for this video, we're going to explore systems of equations with substitution. So go ahead and take a moment to fill that in at the top of your page for your topic. And then our essential question for today is, how can a trade be made to solve a system of equations? How can a trade be made to solve a system of equations? And we're going to get into what that means. And when you're talking about substitution, the most important thing is this word trade. In fact, I'll highlight both of those things because substitution is really just a trade. And so let's take a little bit of time to define what are the important terms. So go ahead and jot that question down. The first important term is system of equations. It's two or more equations in one or more variables that must be solved together. Okay, so a system of equations is two or more equations in one or more variables that must be solved together. I'm going to define this next word, which is substitute. Substitute means to trade something of equal value. And then distribute means to multiply so that each term inside the parentheses is multiplied by the term outside the parentheses. And term, you could also write factor, either one. And so we're going to use both of those, and I'll just give you an example of distribution really quickly. If I know that I have the expression negative 3 times 2 plus 4x, I'm going to distribute the negative 3 so that I get negative 3 times 2 plus negative 3 times 4x, which will give me the result, negative 6 minus 12x. And often we don't write this step right here. We take and go directly to this step. Okay, so let's talk about this. How do you make a substitution? There's two things to keep in mind. One, you have to identify a fair trade. So for instance, if I have the two equations, which we're going to look at here in just a moment, 5x plus 6y equals 4, and y equals negative 4x plus 7, you have to identify the one that tells you about the fair trade that you might make. And they're both telling you about fair trades because we just need to talk about equal values. But when you're substituting, you're going to look at the equation and I am actually going to move this up so that I don't bleed down into the next page. Go back down there, T. Okay, look for the equation that has x equals or y equals. And I'll kind of adjust my... In this case, I know that y equals negative 4x plus 7. And so then I know you can trade negative 4x plus 7 for y in the other equation. And this hinges on part of the definition of substitution, or sorry, part of the definition of a system of equations that we looked at before. So two or more equations and one or more variables that must be solved together. That means that you can substitute one of the constraints, which would be the y equals constraint, into the other equation. That's going to look like this, and I'm just going to give you the example, and we'll talk about it a little bit more expansively here in a minute. But I'm going to rewrite 5x plus 6y equals 4. I'm going to substitute for y so that I get 5x plus 6, and then I'm going to substitute negative 4x plus 7 where the y was. And then I'll just finish the equation. It equals 4. And then now I have this new equation that somehow will help us solve both equations at the same time, because it has the y equals constraint in it, and now it also has the 5x plus 6y equals 4 constraint in it. So we're going to go ahead and write this next question. What do you do to solve a system with substitution? We're going to run through an example, and I'll just kind of list out some steps over on the right. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you some technique here. And so when I say technique, this is just some things that you can do to try to make your equation or your system solving a little bit more successful. And so when I have 5x plus 6y equals 4 and y equals negative 4x plus 7, I'll make my line here so I know I'm going to write some notes over here on the other side. Step 1, ID the trade equation. So that's step 1, and I'm going to identify that as y equals negative 4x plus 7. And what I'm going to do in that equation, and I'll write it in pink so you can see it, I'm going to box up the y because I'm going to trade it for this negative 4x plus 7. And so my second step is perform the trade using the other equation. Okay, and so I'm going to start by rewriting 5x plus 6y equals 4. I'm going to box up the y just like I did before, and I'm going to trade it so that I'll end up with the new equation, 5x plus 6, and then I'll rewrite everything that y is equal to, negative 4x plus 7 equals 4. And now my next step is going to be to 3 solve the new equation, which I'll substitute EQ. So that's going to look like this. I'll start by distributing, and so I'll get 5x plus negative 24x plus 42 equals 4. So I'm going to keep solving. So that's going to be negative 5x plus negative 24x is going to be negative 19x plus 42 equals 4. I'll subtract 42 from both sides of the equation, and so I'll get negative 19x equals, and that's going to be negative 38. You can see this is starting to work out nicely. Negative 19 divided by negative 19 is x equals negative, or positive 2, because we're dividing by a negative. Okay, so we solved that equation. That's our third step. And then our fourth step here is use the value to find the other variable. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this x equals 2. I'm going to go back to the equation y equals negative 4x plus 7, and I'm going to plug in for x now. I'm going to say y equals negative 4 times positive 2 plus 7. And now I just have some arithmetic to do. Negative 8 plus 7. So y equals negative 1. And so all I did was substitute in for x, because I know what x is now. It's 2. And then that allowed me to find that y is equal to negative 1. And so that's the basic idea behind substitution. You're almost always going to have to distribute. You're always going to have to identify a trait equation and then make sure that you plug all the information in. A couple of caveats is that you should be careful about negatives, especially when you're doing the distribution. You'll occasionally have to deal with those. If you're working on Khan Academy, for these problems, the numbers always kind of turn out nice, or they'll turn into a fraction that's not terrible to work with. So just keep that in mind. If you're ending up with something really crazy, you may want to double check your arithmetic somewhere. But it's really just 4 steps. It's not. It may feel like a lot of work, but when it comes down to it, it's not. If you need help with any of it, please don't hesitate to ask. At this point, you need to make sure that you spend a little bit of time after you are done watching this video writing a summary that answers the essential question: how can a trade be made to solve a system of equations? And so take some time, think about the notes that you just went through, and write something so that you can have a clear sense of what you're supposed to do when you go back to Khan.